I am in the Central Computing Organization, NUIT, and in the department that's involved in faculty support initiatives in teaching and in research. And this includes our LMS. And for many years, we were a Blackboard shop, and we are now a Canvas school. I manage a group of really talented software developers. And so I'm going to talk to you about the work of mostly one of them, Patricia Golick, in integrating our enterprise system, student enterprise system, and Canvas. Just a few things about Northwestern. We're a private institution. We're part of the Big Ten, the athletic conference, and so part of the CIC, which is Big Ten, plus University of Chicago. We have 3 campuses. Our main campus is in Evanston, Illinois. I'm also in Chicago and in Doha, Qatar. We have roughly 19,000 students, 2,500 faculty, and these are across 12 professional schools and college. Just a little backdrop to our efforts with integrating Canvas. Our CIO, Sean Reynolds, when he came, it's probably been maybe 4 years, 5 years now, was really keen on establishing community support for IT governance. And so he established a number of governance committees, one for educational technology. And the Educational Technology Advisory Group established as their highest priority to review our LMS and our educational technology, at the time Blackboard. And that began in 2012. And we looked at, we brought in other vendors. We brought in 4 vendors altogether, including Blackboard, D2L, LoudCloud, and Structured Canvas. And over a period of approximately a year, the faculty were pretty strongly interested or leaning towards Canvas and not so much the other platforms. So we established a pilot, Canvas pilot, that began in 2013. And the committee by the spring, by April, had made the decision that Northwestern would move to Canvas and that move would begin the following fall. So that's the general backdrop timeline for this work. And we're now completing a 1-year transition by fall 2015, returning Blackboard off this summer, just to give you the rest of the story. But that's a different story. So fall 2013, we're doing a pilot. Okay. So summer 2013, we started talking about, well, how are we going to get all the courses in? How are we going to do enrollments? How are we going to do all this? And we certainly didn't want to do it by hand. We didn't know if the university was going to Canvas, so we weren't in a position to establish a large development project. One of the people on my team, Patricia Golick, had a lot of experience with building building blocks in Canvas and Blackboard. So she had a really clever idea. She said, well, listen, we could build a building block. And we could synchronize courses and enrollments and users out of Blackboard into Canvas. That would get us started. It would buy us some time, some breathing room to do proper planning and implementation for a full SIS integration. And it worked great for the pilot. And it also, even though you could say that code was throwaway code, it really wasn't, because we were able to get our first experience with the SIS API out of Canvas. And that was all very helpful. So in the fall, we said, well, we have to do some planning, even though at this point, remember, we still didn't have a decision to go to Canvas. But we have to get ready for this, because if there's a decision in the spring, we're not going to be able to make fall. This is a big task. So we got together with our registrar, our registrar's office, the business analysts, our student enterprise system team, and the Canvas team, or the faculty support team supporting Blackboard at that point. And we started doing some planning. We looked at a number of options. We were in the middle of, or early middle of, a service-oriented architecture initiative. And so one of the questions was, how does the SOA initiative relate to this? Should we be exposing various services out of our SIS for this purpose? The other interest was our SIS, PeopleSoft, has a LIS implementation. Can we take advantage of that? Or are we doing something custom? Who's involved? How much work is it? So those were the questions before us. we very quickly came to the strategy of we can't do LIS because Canvas doesn't support LIS yet. We didn't want to do SOA because that would have been a lot of effort across a number of units, and we didn't want to jeopardize this transition. So we said, let's try to reduce the number of moving parts and do as little as possible at that point. And so we decided to develop our own custom solution for integrating the data from our SIS to Canvas. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. We started that development in the winter of 2014. We did our first synchronization the end of May, and we're in production that summer. So I mentioned we're a PeopleSoft shop, Blackboard shop. For a long time in Blackboard, 14 years. For much of that, we use a Blackboard snapshot controller to synchronize courses out of PeopleSoft to Blackboard. And basically, this works as a shared file system that writes users and courses and enrollments, organizational structure to a shared file system, and then the Blackboard, the snapshot controller picks that up, synchronizes to Blackboard. So we thought, let's leverage this. Let's not reinvent a lot of new things. This isn't the time to innovate. Let's just make this work. Let's try to keep as little custom work on the PeopleSoft side as possible and just try to achieve the same synchronization of data in our own custom solution to Canvas. That almost worked. It pretty much did work. In spirit, it worked. But we discovered along the way that there were some things that we did want to change in terms of the feeds coming out of PeopleSoft. Some fairly minor things. For the most part, we were able to keep the technology that we were using for writing those feeds, keeping all the business rules for what are relevant courses at any point in time, what are relevant terms, et cetera. So we kept all that logic, didn't mess with that, and we started writing different files to a shared file system for our LMS sync to Canvas. The LMS synchronizer software from the outside looking in is well, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. We had a few operational goals that guided us. One was it had to be automated, of course, but we wanted some transparency. We didn't want this automation to be a black box that no one knew what was going on. So we wanted a lot of flexibility in configuration and also monitoring. And sometimes, depending on the number of courses that are relevant at any point in time, early in the term, there's a lot more enrollments, et cetera, et cetera. These synchronizations can take various amounts of time. We wanted transparency on what was going on through that. We couldn't judge whether a long-running synchronization was in trouble or not. So transparency was important. Flexible configuration. We didn't want the developer to have to be the go-to person every time there was some question. Right? We wanted the faculty support people to be able to configure and also monitor the synchronization. And it had to be robust and fault tolerant. Things happen, right? And we had to build as much fault tolerance into it as possible. So those were some guiding principles. From the outside looking in, it's a multi-threaded LMS sync processing engine. It has internal services that go through the various processes of processing the data, orchestration over that to keep those processes running properly in the right order and to be fault tolerant. It runs as a Tomcat servlet container, and this supports web apps for monitoring and the console and those sorts of things I talked about. And it uses Oracle underneath and JPA for object relational model. It's a Java application, and so we needed a good object relational model for that. I mentioned it has applications and user applications for configuration and console. And then it also has some RESTful services that we consume by some LTI apps for doing administration. And I'll talk more about all these things. The main processing is loading the data, finding out what's different from the previous load. We're getting full snapshots from our SIS. We're not getting adds and drops. We're getting the full, all the users, all the courses that are relevant at any particular time, all the enrollments. And it's up to us to figure out what we need to send to Canvas ultimately. The staging service processes those differences, and then we write files that go to Canvas, and then we submit those files to Canvas, and then we monitor to to make sure that those submissions were successful, and if they're not, to report them, and so on. I'm going to talk in detail about all of these. First is the loading service, and I have the snapshot DB on the bottom is basically a representation of our SIS data. Courses, users, terms, enrollments, and categories. And these are the files that are the SIS feed files that we use. The terms file is interesting. It has a list of all the relevant terms at any point in time. And a term can be relevant because students can now enroll in those courses, or we're actively in that term, or the term's coming up, or it just finished, but it's still underway. We are on quarters, but our medical school and our law school are on semesters. So we can have as many as 5 terms that are relevant at any point in time. And that terms file tells us which ones are relevant, but it also has counts for the number of courses, the number of enrollments, and we're able to validate the course files and the enrollment files, which we have one for each term in this loading process to make sure that we don't have corrupted data, we didn't miss something. So there's validation at that point. The diff service then goes and looks at those data to find out what are the differences, and it produces tasks, which are basically transactions. Add this enrollment, update this course, delete this, sort of database transactions. And that's all managed in the scheduling database, which is basically the state machine for this whole thing. The scheduling model includes a couple of other things as well I'll talk more about later that have to do with notifications and managing the submissions to Canvas. The staging server then goes through all those tasks, processes them, and updates what we call the staging database. This is our sort of picture of what should be in Canvas. Though it's not Canvas specific, it's LMS neutral in terms of its data model, but that is where we have a sense of what is currently now in our LMS. And so that's what the staging service does. And it includes also terms, courses, users, enrollments, organizations. Organizations are mapped to sub-accounts in Canvas, if you're familiar with Canvas. And then we also produce cross-listings. There are cases where courses are taught, multiple courses are taught at the same location. They're cross-listed in the student enterprise system. The registrar does that, the departments do that. And those classes they share common keys for in these cross-listed courses. We take advantage of that, create an aggregate course for Canvas, associate these children courses with it, and then establish, provision those courses in Canvas, create the cross-listing records as well for Canvas. So cross-listing was another sort of piece of the business logic which we added in the synchronizer, which is useful. Okay, then the writing service goes and looks at all the staging objects that have been changed but not yet written to the database, the dirty objects, and it creates the Canvas CSV files and produces zip files for submission to Canvas. And those are kept on the file system. They're archived. We keep previous versions of this. We keep previous versions of all the feed files coming in. So we can go backwards in time in that way as well, rerun things. And the state for this whole process is updated as well, update SAS task states. So at this point, we have the files. We're kind of ready to send them to Canvas. And then the next step is that, submission. We process all those submission records in the scheduling database, which keeps track of the state of this whole process. It uses the Canvas SIS, API for submitting these zip files actually to Canvas, and that's its job. And then lastly, on a separate thread, we monitor these submissions. So we want to make sure that they were successful. If they weren't successful, what happened? What were the error codes that came back from Canvas? And so that admins can monitor the state of this at any point in time through our monitoring software. We need to keep that updated. One thing that's worth mentioning is that the writing of these records can be sort of segmented. That is, we could say we want to write 10,000 records at a time. And so if we have more than that, then the writing service, for example, might be in a loop. It would produce those 10,000 records, and then the orchestration would advance it to submission. Those would be submitted, monitored, and then go back. Is there more? If there's more, it continues to do that. And only until we've finished completely with a particular stage are we advancing forward completely and get to a finished run of the synchronizer. So that's the forwards loop. I mentioned we can have as many as 5 terms sometimes, 10,000 courses, 150 enrollments, 50 users, 50,000 users. And we're synchronizing right now about twice a day. We think we might bring that up to 3 times a day. But we haven't really gotten the request for that from our faculty, so we're staying at twice a day right now. But what if there's a problem? What if we get a bad feed? The network goes down, or there's some kind of a problem, and the synchronizer detects that. Remember, I said it needs to be fault tolerant. If that's the case, if our incoming data doesn't validate, or some of it's missing, we will suspend that run. Emails go out both to the faculty support team and to my group, and we look and see what the problem is. And, you know the drill. Find out what the problem is, fix the problem, and then we can resume those runs. So there's a sort of a backwards loop that takes place, and in this case, we kind of work from the far right back. So if there's any more submissions left for that run, once we're ready to go, they're submitted, and then it goes back to the writing service. Is there any more writing? Those are written, and then we go forward to submission service. Those are submitted, and we keep moving back like that until we've processed everything, moving backwards. So that's part of the fault tolerance, that we've built into this. There's also what we call a delta mode. I mentioned that we're producing our own diffs every time. We're getting full, data dumps from our SIS, and then producing the differences and so on. We also have, excuse me, I'm sorry. We also have a mode where you can create a file and just process that file as is. It's not compared against the previous run. It might be that you want to update certain things or whatever. So that we call that a delta run, and that'll just go through the whole process, but without comparing previous diffs. More recently, we got a request for, this came from our research computing folks who are supporting courses that make use of some of their research computing clusters. And typically for those courses, faculty will let them know, and then they'll get requests, course enrollments and so on, and they'll provision accounts in the research computing cluster for everyone in that course. And as they get more and more courses and there's add drops, this can be a kind of a challenging process to keep up with. So we were asked, well, could we, given that we're handling all these feeds, all these enrollments, could we do something to facilitate that? Could we have courses auto-provisioned into the research computing cluster? And in principle, yes. This is something that we're exploring on a number of fronts. One with our student enterprise system, because I mentioned the SOA initiative. Our SIS team have been creating and exposing a variety of services that are available out of student data for various consumers around campus. And we would like to add to that. We'd like to encourage that. So that's a relevant question in terms of perhaps add drop notifications in a push scenario where you have adds and drops are pushed to some listeners that are registered for for those particular events. So we're in some discussion with our student enterprise team on that. We also know that Canvas or Instructure is working on a LIS solution. Don't see that happening for us, in the near term. But of course, that's very much of interest. And if that impacts our enterprise architecture down the road, how do we want to continue with custom work in that regard? That's probably a longer term, mid to longer term proposition. But in the meantime, we're trying to be responsive to our research computing folks who have this interest for fall. And given the architecture of the synchronizer, we have a capability to do notifications to external parties. So what we're doing is we have database structures at this point where you can register watches, either for changes in a particular course, enrollments in that course, changes on users, and so on. So all the SIS activity that we handle for enrollments and so on into Canvas could potentially be, trigger listeners for other purposes, and we're exploring that. And that shows up here after the monitoring stage for notification service. Just a few things. These are just examples of, I'm sorry, you can't see these very well, but there's a council for managing jobs, finding out the state of current jobs, starting, stopping jobs, as well as configuration for the number of records you want to process at a time. Do you want this to happen automatically? Do you want to do it manually? Where do you want notifications to go for email groups and so on? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor for that. There are some other screens as well. These are part of the Tomcat server. And there are some RESTful services. We've been very involved in building LTI apps at Northwestern. We started with some admin apps. We're fortunate to have a lot of support from our schools, school level support, especially for some of the schools. And they wanted to be able to batch enroll students, create custom courses and batch enroll them. It's easy to do in Canvas, through the upload capability. But there isn't a way to provide that upload capability and restrict it to a particular sub-account, right? And so we can't give that capability to our business school and have it affect our College of Arts and Sciences, for example. So what we did is we built some LTI apps that school admins could use to do batch uploads for this purpose. And we have leveraged the LMS synchronizer for all the Canvas interaction. So the LTI apps use a service called Batch Enroll Service for submitting uploaded jobs, uploaded spreadsheets of enrollments. And then the synchronizer takes care of sending those to Canvas and monitoring them, making sure they're good, they complete successfully, and the LTI app can monitor that activity. I mentioned LIS a little bit. Again, this is perhaps a future. Not here today to say that the LMS synchronizer would be part of that, but we do know that it was designed in a way that would afford LIS conformance for basic functionality, and we add some additional functionality around cross lists and so on, cross-listing. So we're mindful of that, and we're not saying we're supporting it at this point or that this would be our solution. I want to credit the developers, especially Patricia, who did the design and the implementation of the synchronizer. She couldn't be here at the conference this week, otherwise she'd be talking to you about it. And also Dan Garza in our Student Enterprise Systems team took care of the feed files for us. There's a lot of work involved. As I mentioned at the beginning, the whole governance process moves at a clip that is not necessarily coordinated with the student enterprise system workload and priorities, and so we were very much borrowing people's goodwill in that area, which they gave us lots of. So I want to credit Dan. If you have any questions, you want to contact me, that's my email. I think we have time for some questions. If you don't mind, if you do have questions, we have a microphone in the center aisle. Please, yes.
How useful was the error messages when you did the submission to Canvas, and then you got the error messages? How useful or informative was that?
The question was how useful were the messages coming back from Canvas after doing submissions?
Right.
Oh, very useful. I mean, because that was how we knew that we were successful. And occasionally things come up. You get requests or you get, why am I not enrolled in this class? Why am I not in this class? And so on. And at that point, you are in a detective scenario where you're trying to find out, did something go wrong on our end? Were they ever enrolled initially, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very important to know if there was a problem, where that problem occurred.
The reason I asked that question is, when we submit, let's say, 10K records, it wouldn't say specifically which record failed.
That's correct. The question was, when you're submitting a lot of records and you get a count back that says how many were successful, but not, which one, where the error occurred. That is a little bit, of a problem. I can't tell you what we do in that. If Patricia were here, she would know. That hasn't been something that's bubbled up to be any sort of a crisis situation for us. We have noticed that there's a discrepancy in the counts between the records that we submit and the records that were actually updated. And for a long time, we thought that was a bug in Canvas. From our perspective, we might argue that's a bug. It turns out that not all records need changing and aren't changing. So that gap sometimes raises a question mark in our mind. It's a kind of a source of mystery sometimes. I think we have a few more minutes. Yes, in the back.
Did you consider using Canvas's automatic add and drop courses rather than calculating your own differences?
I'm not familiar with it. The question was, did we consider using Canvas's automatic add and drop course? You mean students adding and dropping?
No. You're talking about the new batch diff setting, so that you can diff full uploads. That wasn't there. I mean, that's like 6 months old or something.
Okay. Yeah, the answer was, thank you. We didn't have that at the time we were doing this. Probably should look into that. I mean, as you know, I'm sure, there's serious workflow. There's serious data flow. There's serious upstream activity to all of us, through departments and the registrar and using the SIS course. So, our strategy was to try to not jump into the middle of any of that, try to be a transport layer essentially, but a solid one. And so I think we've achieved that. I think we've, early on when you deploy software, you're really looking around. You're looking for anytime there's any sort of question about, why am I not enrolled? You're thinking, okay, what happened? Really got to credit Patricia. It's been really, really rock solid. So I hesitate to say that to sort of jinx things, but we're about a year into that now. Yes, ma'am. Right. The question was about frequency of the runs and latency of the student data. We run these twice a day and have students complain. We haven't gotten any complaints yet. One of the propositions for both the SOA initiative at Northwestern and the LIS proposition that is a little bit intriguing is more the real-time, updates. I think we would look to support for diffing on the student enterprise system. Rather than building around our software to support that. But if we decided to do the latter, we certainly could do that. We certainly could explore that. It takes a while. It can take an hour, hour and a half, depending on where we are in the term and how many enrollments have been processed to complete a run. So we're mindful of that. I mean, that's why we chose 2 hours a day. We could do that very, very comfortably and not have to be looking over our shoulder. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ed Clarity from Copley Retention. We're a certified partner of Canvas. We provide the service right now of bringing in the data from the different SIS systems. And my question is, maybe just to help warn the people here, have you actually started doing early alerts based on all this extra intelligence that you're now getting?
Early alerts?
Yes. Have you started that yet?
Well, we've started doing We've started doing work in this is more an analytics question, I interpreted it as.
It is because, but what I want to get to is that what everyone's going to find is that as you have this huge wealth of data, as
Right.
long as you have a great visualization deck, you're going to be pinpointing students much earlier in the Falter process, but you're also going to be overwhelming your advising staff with all of these extra people who
Right.
need interventions.
Right. Yeah, that's a little bit of a different story. We've been using the API to grab peer review assignments and present those to the TAs to create network graphs and the discussion forums to show that sort of activity. We're very excited about what's now called Canvas Data. It had been called a hosted data solution for a while, basically a data warehouse. So you don't use the API, you have some latency, but you can do SQL queries and you can do a lot more. So we have a whole kind of a software stack over the API that we could substitute SQL queries, and that stack runs through out to visualization,
Okay,
platform.
but again, I just wanted to warn everyone that you're going to get a lot more of a load on faculty and advisors because you're going to be able to pinpoint students much earlier in the process
That's
and
a good
more
thing.
of them.
Yep. Yes, sir.
So you had mentioned that you looked at SAIP, you said the LIS
Yeah.
found in Oracle, and you're not using it. I know one of the reasons people choose not to use that is because you get the data as is in Oracle, PeopleSoft directly into Canvas. Did you have business requirements that steered you away from that, like needing to be able to duplicate sections, or was it just a technical?
We didn't get that far with it. The question was, why did we not decide to go with the LIS product for PeopleSoft, SAIP? And the reason was simply, part of it was just calendar and time frame. Part of it was the amount of engagement that would take on the SIS team, and they didn't have those cycles. But fundamentally, Canvas didn't support LIS at that point. And so if we were to do something for LIS support, we're not only doing that, but we're taking on all the SAIP, learning curve, et cetera. So we did budget that at one point, quite seriously. We did anticipate that or allow that, but it just didn't make sense for us in our time frame, SAIP. Yes, sir.
Just a couple things. First, I created our implementation for the data schools for our integration. So rather than doing the whole dipping thing, that was kind of a next phase for me. I'm just going and grabbing I'm doing the delta mode basically.
Yep.
So I'm grabbing based on the enrollment dates or the data that I get. So it's like grab everything for today. So what ends up happening is I get hourly incrementals all day. So students are happy because in fact, they're happy adds and drops processed within an hour. But of course, I don't have the fault tolerance, so you have that built in the whole thing. On the retention, the other gentleman mentioned about the increased data. I also built a kind of retention project for pulling in usage data. And we just started this last spring, but we haven't done the retention numbers, but I'm not as worried about the rush of, impact on our support services because there's students that weren't getting supported before. And I mean, anything additional we can do for those students is great. So whatever data you can get on where your students are at, don't worry about being overwhelmed with the services because you need to know this. So, sorry.
Thank you very much for your comments. I just want to add to that, we might be out of time, I'm not sure. I'm getting a nod, yeah. I just wanted to add to that, students coming forward, that's a really interesting piece of the whole analytics question. We have all these analytics discussions at the program level, at the individual faculty level, but what do students want to know in terms of analytics is really interesting. Thank you all very much for coming. I believe we're out of time.